Hello, Miss Katie. So we'll be presenting about personality factors today. In our group, we have Siti Patricia, Nurul Hadirah, SHREENDER, Komal, and myself, Priyadharshini. So we'll be presenting about the intelligence and the brain first. So the human brain can be divided into two hemispheres, which is left and right. The left side is responsible for writing, language, science, mathematics, list, logic, and linear thinking, while the right side covers emotions, music, creativity, imagination, dimension, gestalt, and holistic thinking. So we always come up with the question whether the intelligence and language are affected each other. This can be similarly explained through the chicken and egg story. We don't know which came first, whether the chicken came first or the egg came first. Similarly, we don't know whether the intelligence are affected by the language training or the language training affected by intelligence.
Okay, hello Miss Kathy. My name is Hadirah. Moving on to the next explanation. Okay, we often heard question for someone who has lower IQ level, which will be harder for them to learn language. And the answer is actually no. IQ level does not affect entirely language acquisition because our brain has different parts that are responsible for different functions. And then for the second question is, are there any specific areas in the brain for language? And the answer is yes. It is called as temporal lobe and it controls linguistic features like speech and also hearing. And that is why teachers should acknowledge that if a learner with a lower IQ level or assumed as not intelligent, it does not mean that she or he will face any difficulties in acquiring language, especially second language. And then moving on to the age.
In the age factor, we would like to provide an extra information about the myth, madam, because there is a myth that states that language learning is considered as a matter of imitation. Okay, why this happens is because normally we can see this in children's speech development. We can see that the children actually can speak well. Normally we will tell this is because they actually imitate that thing from their parents and people surrounding them. They create new sounds and start following whatever words and sentences that the parents say, and they are speaking well. But this is only a myth for the information, madam. So because there is a lot of researchers and theories has proven that age and language learning is not it does not happen through imitation.
Okay, next, actually, age is one of the factors of acquiring second language, and it should be encouragement in learning the second language itself. Okay, how would I say this? Because it is proven in a theory called critical period hypothesis, or simply say as CPH. Okay, Brown and Ellis emphasize that there is actually a biological timetable for those who want to acquire first and second language, and it can be more successfully achieved if the learning commences before a certain age. And what can be summarized from this theory is actually there is a critical period for first and second language to be acquired, and it shows that children has greater advantage than adults or adolescents. And then moving on to the researchers, okay, there are four findings, and the first one is about morphosyntax, which is by Singleton, 1995. Okay, morphosyntax is actually a relationship between morphology and syntax. Morphology is actually the study of words, and syntax is actually the study of sentence. And how the process will be is older children or adults will be quicker to develop synthetic and morphological understanding because they are more sensitive towards that area. And then however, there is an argument by Christian et al. It said that learners who begin their second language acquisition from children have higher second language proficiency than those who start from adult. Which the older is faster, but the younger is better. And then for the second finding, which is about representation and processing of second language words. Okay, this conceptual representation actually emphasizes on early English bilinguals. Okay, how the process would be? There are three stages. The first stage is the conceptual stage, which basically the idea. Okay, the child know there is a name for and a subject which which is small animal that has soft fur, pointed ears, and long furry tail. And for the second stage, which is the lexical, the student know the actual answer of the idea that they thought of, which is a name of a cat. And for the third stage is actually constituent parts, which they know on how to pronounce the word, which is spoken with the phoneme K but written with the letter C. And then for the third finding,
Moving on to the third finding, madam, it's on phonology and accent. So, what is phonology and accent here simply means the neurophysiological maturation, which is the activity of the nervous system and also the maturation phase. Together, when it is linked with establishment of cerebral lateralization for language function, the foreign accent can present very easier in those who learn second language. This can be Singleton and Langiel in 1995. They also found out in a research that actually adolescent who has attained their age, who are called as pubescent second language speakers, can actually acquire or master second language very easily. It is also linked to the neuromuscular plasticity of the muscles. Okay, what does the neuromuscular plasticity of the muscle do is it helps to articulate speech and also to create new sounds, to produce new sounds. So we can take example from the synaptic between the relationship of synaptic connection and also the aging. So what does it mean by synaptic connection here is the synaptic connection helps to control the activity of movement of a person, and also it also helps to send signals to our brain to do an action. So if we for an example, if we ask a kid to do instruction to do a work, maybe they can do it in a very quicker manner compared to the elder person. Sometimes the elder person might not do it, they might do it in a slower way, or sometimes they might even forget. This is because of the synaptic connection actually reduces in their brain system. And then moving on to the fourth finding on universal grammar. So universal grammar, as we know, it is a thing that naturally located in our brain to help the learners to acquire first language easily. But unfortunately, there is an argument between Mato Hajrano and Flynn in 1993 stated that universal grammar and critical period hypothesis is not connected each other. This is because when the critical period hypothesis ends, the second language acquisition becomes really, really difficult and challenging for the second language learners. That's all from me, madam. Thank you.
Hello, Miss Katie. My name is KOOMALPREET. So moving on to personality. Firstly, what is affective domain? Affective domain refers to the emotional aspects of human behavior that could be linked to cognitive aspects. Emotional aspects such as self-esteem, inhibition, risk-taking, anxiety, empathy, and extroversion, all these emotional aspects of human behavior is highly related to the cognitive aspects. For an example, if a person is having anxiety, he or she would not be able to learn the second language much effectively because he or she cannot process the language learned because of the anxiety faced. Secondly, Bloom et al. 1964 have proposed the development of affective domain. Next.
So for the development of the affective domain, there are 5. So the first one is receiving, where the learner is aware of its surrounding and also is conscious of their situation around them, and they usually openly receive feedbacks from other people. Second is responding, where they give attention and accepts the response that they get. Third one is valuing, where valuing a behavior or a person selectively. They basically observe other people around them and how they behave. Fourth is organization, where they pick the most important value and places it on the top of the priority and create a hierarchy for it. And lastly, the value system, where an individual thought process determines their characteristics and they are understood by the society based on their value system. So looking at the personality factors, there are six personality factors. So the first one is the self-esteem. So in self-esteem, there are 3 levels, which is general, situational, and task. So for the general, It is basically an overall self appraisal over time. So self appraisal, self praising yourself whenever you have accomplished a task, a goal that you have set. Secondly, is a situational level where praising depending on a specific life situation. So, example, praising yourself during an award ceremony that you have achieved. Third is the task level where praising is done when a specific task is accomplished by the person. Okay, next.
Next is inhibition. Inhibition is an innate defense system to protect the ego. Having low inhibition can make second language acquisition easier. Inhibition basically means shyness, so it is actually restricting a person to acquire a language. So if you have lower inhibition, your learning second language acquisition is process is easier because you are not shy and you are active in the classroom and you participate in all the activities held in the classroom, so your language acquisition process is easier and faster. For next is risk taking. Risk takers acquire second language faster as they aren't afraid of making mistakes. This means that risk takers are basically brave and they are not afraid of making mistakes. But this doesn't mean that they can make any type of mistakes and that they are not supervised. On the other hand, the learners should be supervised by the teacher, and they should also be monitored by the teacher on what kind of errors they make, because if they keep making errors they would not learn, and they would learn the wrong information. So hence this is why risk takers should also be supervised by the teachers. And anxiety is a feeling of frustration, worry, and apprehension. There are two types of anxiety: trait anxiety and state anxiety. State anxiety is basically momentary level anxiety, which only occurs during a particular event. And trait anxiety is global level, which is inside a human body and it's at all times. It is also debilitative and it is harmful to a person. So state anxiety is just for a particular time being, and a trait anxiety is at all times, and which is very harmful to a person's health. Next.
So next is the empathy. So empathy is a feeling of connecting with another person, and in this setting, it's done through language, and empathy is usually done in a verbal communication, and it needs a feedback from other people to determine a person's behavior. So a person with good empathy inquires the language better because they have a sense of understanding. Next for the extroversion. So extrovert people are usually very outgoing and they are not shy to make any mistakes when they are acquiring the language. However, they need to control their ego and self-esteem so that they can mend their mistakes when acquiring the language. Through all this, an extrovert has a better understanding in acquiring the language. Okay, next.
Mm. All right. Hello, Miss. Okay, so before we go into the factors that influence learning styles, I would like to just show the importance of knowing the factors. So since there's limited space on this brochure, I will just explain it. So from studies that are conducted using positron emission tomography, so PET, and magnetic resonance imaging and MRI, as well as Schumann's study in 1997, we can see that if a teacher poses a task that is too difficult, the student's brain will react negatively. And when the student's brain reacts negatively, of course, the students will have a bad feeling or an apprehension towards the task, and in the long run towards the language itself. So as teachers, it's important for us to know the factors that influence learning styles. So going into the factors, the first one is field independence. It is one's ability to focus on a particular factor in a field of disturbance. This basically means that if someone has field independence, they can focus on the lesson despite all the noise or all the distraction that is surrounding them. But if they have field dependence, means that they don't have that ability, meaning that they need a more quiet space, a quiet environment in order to actually comprehend the lesson. So as a teacher, we need to keep this in mind when we are creating classroom environments to ensure that students have preferably an environment that is conducive to learning. And then left and right brain function. Firstly, there we don't solely use one hemisphere and leave the other. In fact, we only just depend on one hemisphere more than the other, but depending on which side we lean towards, we have different ways of thinking. So for the left-brained people, they are more logical. They think more about analytical thoughts and science and mathematics, and they are also more type A, which is they're more organized. So for right-brained people, they are more emotional, visual, and creative. So as a teacher, we need to keep this in mind to ensure that every student in our classroom can be can actually understand the lesson depending on which side they lean towards. Next is ambiguity tolerance. It's one's ability to tolerate ideas that are against their own knowledge and beliefs. So this kind of relates to open-mindedness. So the more open-minded a student is, the easier it is for them to understand the lesson or understand the language and the culture behind it. Next is visual and auditory. And just like the left and right brain function, we don't solely depend on one, but it's just which one we lean more towards. So for visual learners, they are more towards attractive visuals like reading, graphic information from maps, or anything that stimulates their vision. And for auditory learners, they focus more on listening and hearing. So audio tapes, recorded lectures, radios, or anything that stimulates their auditory responses. And then O'Malley in 1985 suggested four learning strategies that teachers should know in order to create a conducive learning environment. So metacognitive, which is the planning and learning process, monitoring performance, and evaluating learning. So metacognitive is a more structured way of learning. So not only do they plan before the lesson, but they also plan afterwards and review the lesson to see what they learned and also how they learned that. Second is cognitive. This focuses on specific tasks and direct manipulation of learning materials. So this one is more pragmatic. So instead of planning everything, we actually use the knowledge we have and pragmatize it. Third is socio-affective. So learning by incorporating social aspects. This could be group work or any kind of learning strategy that involves social interaction between the students. As stated before, some students are more extroverted, so they would probably learn better when they are socially active with people. And the last one is communicative. So this one, you use verbal and non-verbal verbal methods to produce information. So especially in a language classroom, it's important to keep this in mind so that every student in the classroom, despite their differences, they would be able to holistically learn the lesson properly. Okay, that's all for me.
Next, lastly, we have linguistic considerations. So there are two types of linguistic considerations. First one is language transfer and second is bilingualism. For language transfer, learners tend to apply first language rules to second language. So this can actually hinder the learning process, and a clear example can be seen when a person applies the same sentence structure to second language acquisition. For example, let's say my first language is Bahasa Malaysia and my second language is English. So in Bahasa Malaysia, I say nama saya, and when I say it in English, it becomes name my. So this is basically hindering the learning process, and it is also a wrong information where a person directly translate the first language rules to second language. But if it is used correctly, it can also benefit the learners and aid the second language acquisition. Next.
Okay, so lastly, bilingualism. Bilingual children have a better grasp of language. However, bilingual adults have trouble code switching. This is because children acquire the language faster as their brain is not mixed up widely with the first language, and adults find it harder because they tend to mix the first language rules into the second language. So, for example, mixing up words or phrases when they speak. Hence, by the help of bilingual books or teaching materials, teachers can teach the learners to acquire the language even better. That's all from us, Miss. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss.